Dear fellow trippers, 1.5 weeks ago my friend David and I had an extremely traumatic experience which I am sure will make all of you even more convinced that the police are a bunch of fucking bastards and that the system, wherever you are, stinks to high heaven. But first let me tell you about the circumstances of this experience. 5 days earlier I went to a huge rave, about 6,000 people, in Cape Town, South Africa, where I live and where this whole story is set. I dropped a cap of acid and had the most uplifting, euphoric experience of my life. There were no fantastic visuals or anything, in fact 4 our fiends had caps from the same batch and said they were practically duds. Anyway, my trip was so good that I thought I must be the luckiest person out of all the thousands of people there. I won't go into much more detail about it cause there are no words to appropriately describe what I had experienced. The point of this is that when it came to the trip Dave and I were to have later that week, I knew that it would be good. I was still basking in the glory of the one at the rave. This was also to be our first trip outside of clubs or raves, so I was nervous but excited with anticipation. The night before we went to a club to buy the acid. We only got 1 cap to split between us, but this was a double-dipped Silver Surfer flown in fresh from Amsterdam that afternoon, so we presumed we had made a pretty good purchase. Now for the main part of the story. The next evening Dave and I went to the shopping complex at the Cape Town waterfront and bought tickets for the animated film Pocahontas. At 5:15 we went into the cinema and dropped our half tabs. Half an hour and that lovely tingling feeling we know so well began. After an hour or so I was getting very restless and sucking furiously on the lollipop I had. But I was determined to follow the plot of the movie right to the end and in fact I did. Despite sometimes getting lost in arbitrary little details of the animation, and becoming aware that the walls around me were changing color. Then the movie ended and, bang! Pow! The trip kicked in so hard I didn't know what hit me. We could hardly get out of our seats cause everything was so fucked up. When we made it outside the archway with pictures on the walls was warping hectically and I felt warm with pleasure and weirdness. Dave and I needed to go for a piss and when I stood at the urinal I thought peeing was the funniest stupidest thing in the world. We then proceeded to walk around the shopping center, amazed at the wonderful sights and sounds that hit us. There was a funny old dude playing the piano. This sounded like the most hectic happy hardcore we'd ever heard. I watched David's lollipop pulsating while he told me that he was seeing it leave long trails when he waved it around. We took a stroll outside where it was really cold, so decided to go to the car to fetch our jackets. At the parking lot there was a security guard who seemed to be watching our every move. Now in the car we had a couple of joints waiting for us. This was to be yet another first for us, smoking up while peaking on acid. But I said to Dave that we'd better leave that for now because the security guard was making me a bit nervous. She was looking straight at us and talking into her radio. I didn't want any cops to come roaming around looking for someone like us to pounce on. So anyway we left the car and I forgot about being worried and continued to enjoy my superb trip. We headed for the BMW pavilion where they have luxury cars hanging from the ceiling. This was intensely amusing, and clean, smooth decor, polished floors etc. which was very pleasing to look at. But of course we wanted some more adventure, so we headed back towards the shopping center. When we came to cross a road I remarked to Dave that I could feel the sounds of the passing cars deep within me, but all he could do was burst out laughing in reply. Back at the shopping center we went into a sweet shop filled with millions of brightly colored sweets. I somehow managed to buy a long stick of gum and when we came out of the shop I just began playing with it in my hands cause I didn't know what else you were supposed to do with it. I also marveled, and laughed my head off, at how I had actually managed to acquire this gum. We walked into a shop that we just couldn't understand. It had a whole lot of interesting looking stuff with people looking very interested in everything, so we tried to look interested but simply couldn't. So we walked out and just strolled around feeling like we were about to explode with energy any second. Every now and then closing eyes to see everything rushing towards us and expecting, and wanting, to be swallowed up by the ground at any moment. We went into a bookstore which had the most unbelievably brightly colored magazines, toys, books, stationery, floor, ceiling, shelves, etc. I saw other people looking interested in the things people are normally interested in looking at, like magazines and CDs, so I tried to do the same to look a bit normal. But trying to concentrate on anything just made me more inclined to stare at the stupidest things, like blank paper, pencils, etc. We sat on a bench in the middle of the complex where we could just watch everything happening around us. I said to Dave that it looked like people were all walking leaning to the side, so he told me that he could tell what type of people they were by the way they walked. After a bit more walking around feeling very amused with ourselves, we decided to go out to the car to get the dope that was waiting for us. On the way to the parking lot I remembered the gum, so we proceeded to stuff our mouths with the stuff. A thoroughly satisfying experience. Once inside the car Dave noticed that same bitch of a security guard staring at us from some distance, so we just remained calm and chilled out for a while, enjoying the gum and the pictures behind our closed eyes. After a while we got out and opened the boot to get the joints. We were planning on going for a walk towards a darker area so that we could smoke them without being seen, but at this moment there were still a few too many poulp around, so we sat in the front of the car again chewing furiously on the gum and laughing and carrying on like complete loonies. Eventually we couldn't contain ourselves any longer, we just had to smoke. So we decided that we would walk to the exit of the parking lot and along the road that lead out of there towards Sea Point, a suburb. This was a dark and quiet road and we thought it would be okay to smoke as we walked along. Before we got out of the car, I was agonizing over what to do with my gum, cause I didn't want to smoke with it in my mouth, but it was so good that I had to save it for later, so I was immensely pleased with myself when I left this huge glob perched on top of the steering wheel. We got out of the car with our joints in our pockets and went round to the back to put something, can't remember what, in the boot. As we were getting ready to close the boot and move on, I noticed a police van drive slowly past. It then stopped almost directly opposite us, and when I looked at the driver our eyes locked in one terrifying moment. We started walking away and I saw out of the corner of my eye the reverse lights of the van come on and it backed slowly after us. I was now panicking. I knew that the cops were now onto us and I was desperate to get away to avoid being arrested for being in possession of dope. We were going towards the exit of the parking lot now and I couldn't understand why Dave was so calm about all of this. Didn't he know that the cops were about to get us? I tried to tell him to head back towards the shopping center where we could get lost in the crowd, but he was just asking dumb questions about what direction we would take to Sea Point. I realized that it must be the trip that's making me paranoid. This happened on a previous trip, where I became terrified and it turned out to be my imagination. When I realized this, the trip turned into one of the best I'd ever had. So with difficulty, I followed Dave's lead and continued walking with him. But I couldn't shake this feeling of fear, especially after walking past yet another cop van. Although this one was empty, all the goodness of the trip up to now had been converted into gut-wrenching panic. I was acutely aware that we were being watched, particularly by the police. I heard voices which I sensed were talking about how to get us. As we left the parking lot and started along that dark road I was sure I saw that same van circling the area from which we had just come, and I was expecting it and other cops to come and get us at any moment now. I thought about getting rid of the dope now while we still had the chance, but then I saw how cool and collected Dave looked and I thought he would think I was silly to waste perfectly good joints. I desperately tried to hang on to the rationality that seemed to come to Dave so easily. But the more I did so the more I thought about how we were walking straight into a carefully laid trap. I thought about going to prison and my normal friends and the rest of society condemning me. I thought about how I would bring shame to my parents and relatives, and also how I had just blown my chance to continue with the fun, free life I had been living at this time, though this idea seemed insignificant in contrast with the shit we were getting ourselves into at this very moment. All this time though there was a slender thread of hope I could still cling to. The knowledge that I was, after all, tripping and I could be completely freaked out because of that alone. This thread of hope disappeared completely when the cop van drove up and stopped beside us. Oh fuck. My heart was pounding. The guy in the van talked to us in a very strange way. He was telling us something about people breaking into cars in the parking lot and he wanted to check if ours was okay. In between sentences he was speaking into his radio saying, "We've got 2 guys here," or something like that. I knew that we were being stalled while backup cops were being called. He was asking us where we were going and why we would park our car at the waterfront if we were going to Sea Point. I was glad that Dave was still calm enough to handle the situation. He was acting innocent and seemed to be speaking very sensibly, so I let him do all the talking. Later I found out that Dave actually had no idea what was going on cause he was so tripped out. Meanwhile I was, even in my petrified state, very impressed and relieved that he was putting on such a good act. Dave suggested we walk back to the parking lot. The cop agreed with this, Apparently Dave had the idea all the time that this cop was actually trying to help. So back we headed, and what does this dickhead of a cop do? He follows slowly at about 20 meters behind us, headlights watching every movement we make. I was saying to Dave, how the hell are we going to get rid of this dope? Despair. We couldn't drop it now, the cop would see. Then Dave turned round and stopped walking. By this time he had also become suspicious, but luckily wasn't nearly as freaked out as I was. The fucking bastard then sped up to us so quickly and STPP'd so close that he almost knocked us down. He told us to hop in, and as he rolled slowly by and I realized that we would be heading straight back in his van, I took the opportunity to slip the joint out of my pocket and let it fall silently to the ground. Walking round the back of the van to the passenger side, I noticed with horror that Dave hadn't yet got rid of his. I whispered loudly, drop it, and just before he climbed in the van he too had flicked away the joint. We sped quickly back to the parking lot where the cop dropped us off, only to be greeted by another one of the jerks. This one also began asking stupid questions and trying to get us to give ourselves away by not knowing where our car was. Meantime, the first idiot had dropped us in a parking lot with hundreds of cars. It would take anyone a few moments to get their bearings and work out where they had parked. At first I was babbling incoherently back at this second cop, fully aware that he would think I was acting very suspiciously, but then I thought, now wait a minute. We're safe now. Fuck the stupid cop. I angrily showed him the keys which I took from my pocket. Unfortunately I didn't have the wit at that moment to also tell him to shove his head up his ass. And went to the car, which Dave had now found, and loudly demonstrated how the key fitted the lock perfectly. At this point I noticed with disbelief that the lump of gum I had left on the steering wheel was gone. I was now convinced that while the cops had happily kept us stalled out on that dark road, they were busy searching our car for drugs. I was shocked and relieved that we had in fact had the dope with us out there and not left it in the car. It turned out, however, that this whole idea was just fantasy. The gum had dropped to the floor of the car. But this idea did contribute to the rush of thoughts and contemplation I had a short while later while we were sitting down outside the shopping center again trying to get over this ordeal. What I thought about and discussed with Dave, while I was physically shaking and feeling very nervous and fragile, was how it is so crazy and unfair that the police and society consider us to be criminals. I mean, if someone asks me if I have committed a crime I'll say no, but according to the law I should have been put in jail long ago. Why is it that taking drugs is offensive when it harms no one, not even the user, if he is not stupid about it? If I was in another group of friends I might have been into drinking gallons of beer. But of course this is _fine_, and even encouraged in society. And then there's the police. It seems that they are just out to harass us. When they were watching us in that parking lot they just decided that two young guys just having fun must be up to something that posed a danger to society. Yeah, right. Anyway, all this thinking was getting me extremely distressed, so we went to the CD store and listened to some music through headphones to try to get ourselves up again. Somehow Dave managed to get his trip going well again, but when I closed my eyes while listening to the music I saw frightening images of people all around me watching me and I could sense their suspicion off me. The music did help slightly, not by relaxing me, but by giving me a sense of familiarity, of something I knew and liked. I felt a little more comfortable. When we left that store all remaining traces of my TRP, except for a feeling of nervousness, vanished. Dave was still having a good time. The experience had obviously not affected him as harshly as it had affected me, which made me feel more and more pissed off, as the evening wore on, that the cops had done me out of a perfectly good trip. Well, that's the end of this story. Right now it is perhaps too soon after this experience to have learnt anything from it. I am still feeling really resentful and feel that I have an unfinished trip that I have to make up sometime. I won't go on preaching my views now. You can take what message you will from this story.